Hey everyone, welcome to POPXP. And before the show starts, make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications when we go live and we upload awesome new content. And don't forget, if you can, make sure to share our stream on all your social media outlets. We appreciate it, and thanks for helping us grow the POPXP channel.
I am Dracula.
Well, what do you want? If it's trouble, go away. I've trouble enough.
Crazy to know who I am, aren't you? I tell you, I will prove kinship with the ape.
I love that. Good evening, everybody, or should I say good evening? Billy Tucci here. I am one of the hosts of POPXP, and I am so privileged and honored to be coming to you on this wonderful Friday evening to talk about A Century of Horror, the second installment of our new series here on the POPXP. And this episode, we will be covering the years 1930 to 1934, pre-code Hollywood. So without further ado, my co-host tonight is Stephen Perros. And Stephen Perros is a writer for film, TV, and theater, best known for writing Lionsgate's The Cat's Meow, starring Kirsten Dunst, for the legendary director, of course, Mr. Peter Bogdanovich. As a horror film historian, he's done commentary tracks for Hammer Films' The Hound of the Baskervilles, Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, and The Mad Magician with Vincent Price. His acclaimed debut graphic novel, Stoker and Wells, is now on Indiegogo with all new exclusive perks launching this month. Stephen is also my partner on She, Return of the Warrior, and now Haikyo. Steve is the writer of it. We've been friends since 7th grade. He's one of the most charming, brilliant individuals that you'll ever meet. And ladies and gentlemen, it is just my pleasure to introduce my friend, Mr. Stephen Perros.
There it is. Hello.
How are you, Stephen?
I'm well, Billy. Thrilled to be here. Thank you for that lovely introduction. We're here. You know, Billy came to me and said, "Why don't we?" You know, Billy knows me since 7th grade, throwing issues of Famous Monsters of Filmland at him, trying to indoctrinate him into the dark arts of motion picture horror films, and it stuck, which I'm very happy to see. And so he said, well, why don't we do a show, this network that we're doing, and we're getting audiences, and people want to tune in, and people want to know all about the influences ultimately on pop culture and comic books. And there's so much influence from horror films, particularly of this period, on what we watch every day, that we decided to put this show together. Originally, it was going to be a show where we would go through the decades one at a time, and we did our first show was the dawn of cinema up to through the silent era, 1929. And then we realized when we really took a look at the 30s, how chock full the 30s was, and just how nicely the first episode went, we realized that we've got to divide the 30s in half. And it became really clear what the sweet spot was. It was this era known as, from 1930 to 34, known as pre-code Hollywood. A pre-code meant was that up until the early 30s, there were censorship in the sense of the studios saying, we've read the script, you got to trim that, you got to do that. But there, if the filmmakers pushed back a little, they got what they wanted. Quote unquote, nobody was complaining until someone complained. And that someone ultimately was rallied around via the Catholic League of Decency. And they really wound up, and one of my guests coming down the pike will be able to elaborate a little bit more on this. But they essentially got something passed called the Hollywood Production Code. And that was the law of the land. It really stopped everything we're about to see, which was gruesomeness, which was perversion, which was elements of torture and strange and Satanism and all sorts of things, and cleavage, by God, that you would see, language that you would see in films of this period, and it went away. or rather, it had to be done in a little bit more clever way to get past the censors once 1935 kicked in. But I want to bring on our guests. So this is what we're going to be going through. You saw a little bit of a glimpse of what pre-code horror was like in that opening. I want to bring on the three panelists who, in addition to Billy and I, will be taking you through what it was like to go to your local movie theater in 1931, 32, 33, and 34, and await the next horror to blaze across your eyes. My first guest is Stan Taffle. He's a 3-time Emmy-winning actor, but he is also a motion picture and television archivist and historian. He's president of the Cinecon Classic Film Festival, the nation's longest-running classic motion picture festival, which was held for the first time virtually over Labor Day weekend and drew a virtual audience of, I think, over 5,000 people. But I think I would like Stan to correct me on that. Please welcome Stan Taffle.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Stan.
There was actually, and to my surprise, we hit 20,000 people worldwide.
Wow! Forgive me for the low ball. My God, I winged this 2 seconds ago. I realized that my old intro for you talked about it coming next weekend. So
right, exactly.
20. That is extraordinary, Stan. Extraordinary. Our next guest is Justin Humphries. He's a writer, film historian, and curator. His latest book is the Rondo Award-winning Dr. Phibes Companion about the classic Vincent Price film from the 70s. And his next book is George Pal, Man of Tomorrow, which will be George Pal's authorized biography, George Pal being the producer, maestro impresario of blazing color 50s sci-fi, When Worlds Collide, War of the Worlds, Conquest of Space, and so many others. Please welcome Justin Humphries. Hello, Justin.
Hello, everybody. How's it going?
Very, very good.
Good to see you.
And our third and final guest to join us, we have Perry Shields, who is a lifelong monster kid, actor and director, who has portrayed Universal makeup legend Jack Pierce at conventions and industry events. And I just saw him, something we may screen on one of our 40s shows. I just saw him do a political debate, a presidential debate as Frankenstein's monster versus the Wolfman on the stage of the Alex Theater in Glendale. He has been a theater MC at every Monsterpalooza but one since 2010, Monsterpalooza being the really extraordinary convention that they hold in Burbank yearly that really focuses on monsters and creatures going back to the 30s all the way to the present. He currently teaches high school drama and film appreciation class in Los Angeles. Will you welcome Perry Shields to the show? Hello, Perry. Welcome. The outdoorsman. The outdoorsman.
Yep. I'm in California. What can I say?
Excellent. Excellent. Well, welcome, everybody. Stan, I'm glad that you are up in Idlewild with what seems to be a very fine connection this time.
Oh, as a result of the last show, my wife and I had major decisions to make. But welcome to my theater.
Hey, oh, wow. Yes, that's right.
Look at the cans. Nice cans.
Well,
lovely.
I'm in a room with almost 4,000 films, and if I turn my head this way, right over here, that is the entire Frankenstein Dracula Wolfman collection in 16 millimeter.
Wow. That's extraordinary. That's extraordinary. No, Stan is Stan will I mean the Cinecon Film Festival, Stan runs it not for any other reason than that he's the guy who knows this stuff, and we're thrilled to have him on the show. We're thrilled to have this bunch with us. So unlike the this idea of pre-code horror, all of you have spoken about it at different times to different audiences, and it's going to be nice to sort of walk our way through what it was like to be in America and have on Valentine's Day on February 14th, 1931, Dracula open. And then because of the success of that, 9 months later, Frankenstein was in theaters. Went from oh my God, we got to cash in, to 9 months later, one of the classics of film history was in movie theaters. But let's talk a little about because they were called horror films in 1931 when Dracula came out. And let's talk a little bit about that era, that fed into Dracula. And how that came about. I'd like to talk. We touched a little bit on it, Perry, last time about whether or not the great Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces from the era of silent films. Whether it's an apocryphal tale or not, I've done a little bit of research into that from people who've examined the paperwork at Universal, whether Chaney dying from cancer prevented us from seeing him as Dracula, or whether he never would have played it in the first place. And Perry, do you want to elaborate on? You had a very firm opinion on this last week.
I think that it seems natural, and it seems like it would be totally within the realm of possibility that, in hindsight, that Universal would want Lon Chaney to play Dracula. I mean, maybe perhaps just based on him being in two big hits for them in the 20s.
Well, they did. May I just jump in? They did want him. That from Robert Sklar and a few of the people who looked at Universal Records. They did. Carl Laemmle Sr. said, who was not into this lurid Dracula business. He said he'd do it if they got Chaney. And apparently they did start paperwork, but that doesn't mean we would have ever seen Chaney, or that he would have ever said yes.
No, I don't think that's just it. I think there's a big difference between he crossed their mind. They would have liked to have had him, but I think that Chaney was considering it, or that they made him any kind of offer, just due to the timeline and his health and what was going on.
That's what I think happened. I think that's why it's a question mark. I think it never got to. No. I think at some point they went, oh, just like we do in the business right now. We go, you know what? He's really ill. Oh, yeah, you know. So it isn't even worth having negotiation at that point. I don't think it ever. There's no record of it getting to him or a back and forth. Stan?
No, but as these things grow, you hear, oh, Lon Chaney was supposed to be Dracula, or he was slated to be Dracula, and I don't think any of that.
Yeah, no, it's true. A lot of really ludicrous rumors get started, and all it takes is like one half-heartedly researched book in the 70s starting a rumor like that, and it'll keep getting repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated and repeated by people who don't do archival research or talk to primary sources or anything like that.
Stan, you were going to say, Stan?
Yes, here is my theory about this. Lon Chaney was known for all of the wonderful macabre films that he made. And the greatest thing that you can do when you're working with Todd Browning, who's directing a movie, who has directed Lon Chaney several times, is to use the name as publicity, as a possibility, because it's free. There was no way at that time that MGM, who was Chaney was under contract to MGM. I don't think there's any way that they would have released him. I don't know if they knew he was ill. I don't know if it was an open story. I mean, I think it was a secret about the cancer. And Thalberg supposedly knew. But I think that using Chaney's name in possible advertising or just talking about it throughout Hollywood, it never got further than that. The reason that, first of all, the reason Dracula got made at all, and all of us who love all horror films, is we owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to Carl Laemmle Jr.
To Carl Laemmle Jr. Whoever's got a libation. Cheers.
It was Carl Jr. that wanted to do Dracula. It was Carl Jr. that.
How old was he at the time, Stan? Was he like 23 or something? He
was the Thalberg version of what Universal was. We would not have any horror films like we know today had Carl Laemmle Jr. not said, "Daddy, I have an idea and I'm going to run with it." And since you own the studio and I'm in charge of this area, and the untold amounts of money that Dracula not only made then, but continues to make today, is all because of Carl Laemmle Jr. And he never gets the credit that he so deserves. We owe him Frankenstein. We owe him everything that followed after Dracula. It's magnificent. He is the godfather of the great horror films as we know today.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, Stan,
you're on a little bit of an echo there, Billy.
Let me lower. I'm sorry. Let me lower.
Thank God it's not me.
So, Stan and Steve, so we all know the story about the great Nosferatu film starring Max Schreck, and that was done without permission or the blessings or legally from the Stoker family.
Yes.
Yeah. How was Dracula made? I know we all know that it was in London, right? And in Broadway, it was a play. It was a Broadway play. did he go out there and then get purchase the rights while it was still in the theater, and actually bought the rights to Dracula from the Stoker estate, and that's how then he brought it to, because I mean that movie really kicked off, in my opinion, is the golden age of horror. This period, 1930 to 1934. So how did the film come about to be made?
I mean, go ahead. I'll let you know, Stan. Why don't you jump in? If I have something to add, I'll add.
The whole idea of Dracula as we see it in a film is so different from the Bram Stoker novel. I mean, the Bram Stoker novel is so large and old, and every version of Dracula that was put on stage was different. It was a different adaptation. And in 1927, Bela Lugosi had done an adaptation of it. But again, the one we see in the film is different. There were Hollywood writers that came in and abridged it and changed the whole story. So, even with Frankenstein, like John Balderston gets credit.
Well, let me just jump in. So what happened was it was originally a British stage production. America got wind of it. They said, well, this is a huge hit in London. Let's do it over here. And they took a look at it. And they went, oh, this is even creakier than even American audiences are going to be able to stand. And so that's why there's two authors on the stage play of Dracula that you see all the way up through Frank Langella's version, those two names listed. And so the version there was, I forget what the name of who was the British actor who sort of originated the role.
Hamilton, I think it was Hamilton Dean.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who actually had the writing credit as well.
And I think he also was the first one to wear the cape. Yeah. I think that was where it started with him.
Mm-hmm. And so they did. Then in the late 1920s, there was the Broadway version, which was also hugely successful. Lugosi in it, as they were realizing that Chaney was a non-starter, they weren't entirely convinced of Lugosi. Obviously, some people were pushing. Lugosi was pushing, and his people were pushing. There was some hesitation, perhaps for his accent from the people at the Universal camp. They went up to see him. I think there was a production somewhere either in Northern California or maybe as close as Pasadena. I can't recall, but apparently it wasn't a very full-bodied production. It was a little amateurish, and even then, Papa Lemley wasn't entirely sold on Lugosi. I don't know. Conrad Veidt was being considered, which would have been not a bad choice given his body of work for The Man Who Laughs, from Hands of Orlac, etc. But in the end, Lugosi got his way and apparently didn't do a great job negotiating. He made $3,500 for the whole production. He was one of the lowest paid of all of the leads. David Manners made infinitely more as the dumb blonde man.
And he is so much less as an actor. Like every time David Manners comes on in a 30s horror movie, it's just like, Jesus Christ. They would always put him next to these heavyweights. Yeah. They put him next to Karloff. They put him next to Lugosi or whatever, and he's just blown off the screen, just blown away.
Yeah, and he's got his jaw. His jaw is not just a glass jaw; it's just like a bag of broken glass jaw. I mean, the man falls down the moment you touch his shoulder.
It's sugar glass. It's stunt glass. It's like stunt glass for old ladies to go through.
Well, I have, I don't have it on good authority, but David Manners was very popular at Universal because he knew who to bed.
All right then.
And he also, later in life, he was so dismissive of the movies. I mean, he just totally blew them.
I do want to jump in with a treat that we have for about Dracula. We all are used to the trailers that we see today. We've been used to them for decades and decades. And they always represent footage that we see from the movies. Sometimes the trailer was put together before the final cut of the film, and there may be a little glimpse of a shot that you don't see in the finished film because it's a scene that they ultimately cut just before they went to release of the film. But you rarely, if I would say never, in the last many decades, will see an actual scene from an entirely different take, a different angle that you've ever seen before. And this was largely because when they first started putting trailers together, they said, well, we can't cut up the negative for this other purpose. So how are we want to advertise these films? Oh, I know what we'll do, they said. And it wasn't a silly idea. Let's use footage we're not using in the movie, alternate takes. shots that aren't necessarily going to be part of the finished film. And now these trailers are not the trailers you would see now if you clicked on YouTube for a trailer for Dracula or Frankenstein. These would be trailers from the re-releases that were late 40s, Stan, or is something like that, or
when Real Art re-released them, they got the latest trailer, and they were definite re-releases.
Yeah, so they were those did have footage, but what Stan, our resident archivist, has provided, which you're going to see debut here on Pop XP, is the original, not the re-release, the original 1931 trailer, and this could have shown in theaters as early as late 1930, given the February 14th release date of Dracula. Billy, do you have that ready to queue up? Okay, and then Stan, you can walk us through what.
Well, before Billy turns it on, there is one scene with Dear Edward Van Sloan, which not only is not in the film, it's not an alternate take. We have reason to believe it might have been his screen test. It's when he talks about Dracula's reflection not appearing in the mirror, because when you see this, it is unlike anything you've ever seen from the film, and it is so stodgily staged.
Oh yeah, and it's not even the set from the movie.
No.
Yeah, is there anything else you keep an eye, a specific eye to look at when it's on?
Yes, every single scene you're going to see in this trailer is not in the film. It's an alternate take, or it was from a screen test. You'll know, and Perry is going to go berserk when he sees David Manners in probably his worst acting performance.
Just saying a lot.
And I'll leave our audio on so we can talk over it if you'd like, but we might want to drink it in, if you will.
Yeah. No, you know what? You could turn off our audio for it.
Yeah, I just want to watch it.
All right, me too. Here we go.
I was looking in the mirror. Its reflection covers the whole room. But I cannot see you. Dracula? What's he done to you? Tell me, dear, what's he done to you?
He came to me. He opened a vein in his wrist and he made me drink. I can't die with all that blood on my conscience.
Exceptional.
So, now, Stan, is that, and for all of you, is that line about he opened up a vein in his wrist and made me drink? Those words actually in the film?
I believe they are.
I think they are. They are. But notice how they said super thriller, not horror. It would always be chiller diller or thriller diller or something like that. Or
No, you're right. But if you notice in this trailer, which I find so fascinating, remember, like Steve just told us, Papa Lemley was not sold on the Dracula idea. They didn't even know how to use music for this type of film. So this trailer has this dumpy 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 dump. But in the film itself, except for the fact that we hear Swan Lake in the beginning titles and in the end titles, there's no music at all in Dracula, which I think, by today's standards, is a critical flaw. And they, in the last 20 years overseas, they've released the film with a score with music that was written of the era, which I think plays much better in the film.
I think so. As long I was horrified when they had Philip Glass do the music to it. I hate his music so violently. And what I was going to say was, one of the reasons they use that track from Swan Lake is it's Rothbart's entrance music. It is the villain's entrance music from Swan Lake. And the audiences back then would have been smart enough. A lot of them would have caught that, and they, that's why they used it in The Mummy and all that. But it's also a great track. It's a great track.
Well, yeah. And, by the way, this is a real minutia thing. And then Perry, I apologize, I cut you off.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
For decades, even the 16mm print that I have back there, all of the release prints, all the 35mm prints, when you hear Swan Lake during the opening credits, there is a blip in the soundtrack.
Yep.
So you hear da 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 da. It's a weird little thing. So when my dear friend, who is no longer at the studio, was doing the restorations, I had said to him, when you restore Dracula, look at the track, and if you have a problem, go to The Mummy, because it's the same recording. And he went back to it, and he heard the blip. He corrected it. So now it's available on Blu-ray and DVD, and the blip is gone. And the other thing I asked him about, which we can talk about in the 40s, all the splices in the negative of Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, they've all been fixed too, because some idiot like me, who grew up knowing those splices, said, you got to fix those splices. So, and it's a miracle I found a wife.
Yes. Perry, you're trying to get in a few words here.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say a couple things.
Hold on, we're hearing somebody's feedback. Who's that? I'm hearing my own voice. Is anyone else?
Not me, I hope.
Okay.
It was here.
There we go. Okay. I think we're all right now. Yes, we're good. All right.
The first on that score, I believe, if you have the Blu-ray of Dracula, it's on the French language soundtrack that they have that score made up of cues from Universal of the period, like you mentioned. It was discovered accidentally on Svengoolie a couple of years ago. And that print. People go, what's this? We've never heard this before. And that unearthed the whole mystery of that. I agree that Philip Glass score is like a thick layer of cement. It's not organic. It doesn't. It's like he wrote it in another country without even seeing the film. It doesn't even. But then also there's another flaw, Stan, in the opening titles of Dracula. Do you know what it is? It's a print flaw. It says Carl Laemmle prescient, not present. So I believe in the Blu-ray they may have fixed that as well, which of course diehard fans are like, don't fix it. That's part of the charm that there's a typo in the opening credits.
All right.
So now I have to go back to my Blu-ray and look at that mistake now?
Yes, you do. You do. And your wife's going to have to watch you do it, by God, sir. Right. So I want to spend just a moment on this idea of Spanish Dracula, because I know Billy got very excited watching Spanish Dracula this week.
Yes.
This idea that for a very brief, relatively brief period in film history, rather than dub existing American films into foreign languages, they would actually, in the case of Dracula, the movie would be shot on these sets during the day. That whole crew would pack up and go home, and then a whole new crew and cast would come in at night during the witching hour, midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and shoot the tale of vampires during the vampires' regular working hours. And it became known as Spanish Dracula. I'm happy to say my little piece of film history was when this print debuted and was shown at the American Cinematheque. There was that no one had done subtitles, on-screen subtitles for it. So it was screened in Spanish for an audience that largely knew the story. And Dennis Bartok, who was the programmer and a dear friend, asked me to write up the handout that was given to everyone so they could follow along as if they didn't know Dracula all along.
Well, and fortunately, I think even somebody with the most remedial understanding of Spanish will get Maestro, la sangre, la sangre.
That is funny. Going completely away from Dracula for a minute, but I want to just say I wasn't living in LA, and I heard that Dennis and you had written the notes for that, and I was so jealous that I wanted to fly to see it. But I want to just say that because of that, I learned. Who is that attractive person next to Billy? Wait a minute.
That would be
that's my better half.
You're not kidding.
Asian food for us, right?
Yes, that's what I was coming.
Oh, thank you. I'll eat afterwards.
Bring it up?
No, I'll eat afterwards. This
all
is too
all right. Well, we wanted to attract the younger crowd anyway. Okay, so the idea.
I'm old though.
Not in this lifetime.
So I learned Spanish by watching every Laurel and Hardy film on Channel 47 in Newark, New Jersey. So I'm not kidding. So,
I believe it. I remember Channel 47.
Yeah.
El canal de los grandes espectáculos, primer lugar de sintonía con el 47. Ahora presentamos Lyndon Newark de Hersey. Ahora presentamos Laurel y Hardy y los tres chiflados, Curly, Larry y Moe. So I would have gone to the Cinematheque and I would have known the line.
Yeah.
And I got to say, it's a better, overall, it's a better constructed film than the American version.
Yes.
It is the problem. I think I agree. I agree completely, Stan. I just think, Carlos Villarreal isn't he's not a patch on Lugosi, and neither is the guy playing Renfield. Lupita Tovar is wonderful. She's wonderful.
Now, Lupita Tovar, who plays Mina Harker, right? Steve, remember we had this discussion, Steve and I talked about this a decade ago, and she was still alive.
Yeah.
Well, she passed away in.
I got her autograph. I got her to sign a photo from it years ago.
2016. She passed away on November 12th, 2016, and she was 106 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, what, and it says she died of heart disease. Come on.
Yeah.
We know what really happened.
We tried to get her for Cinecon.
She was a real vampire. Look at her.
Edward, look, Dr. Van Helsing's grandson, Richard Benjamin, finally caught up with her, I guess.
I tried to get her for Cinecon. I got to talk to her son, who was in worse shape than she was at that point. But, none of them could make it. But yeah, she did a great job. By the way, I'm watching us on a 75-inch screen, and I swear to God, I looked up and Billy Tucci was sitting next to Bo Derek. Holy
Yeah, I just met her a few years ago. She was coming out of the local college.
One of his hangers on in the comic book industry. So Dracula. Yes, I think we can agree that one of the amazing things that I encourage people to watch the Todd Browning directed Dracula versus what is the name of the director of the Spanish version? Who knows it offhand? Anybody?
I'll tell you right now. Hang on.
Well, one of the things that's really amazing is just how much more dynamic scene by scene. And Todd Browning was no slouch as a director. I think he made a conscious decision stylistically about Dracula. But there's something about the Spanish Dracula visually that pops so much more. The camera moves so much more. The use of all of that fog and dramatic lighting and it's. I think a lot of fans would agree that as it was in terms of production design, cinematography, and direction, if Lugosi was thrown into there, if Dwight Fry and Edward Van Sloan were thrown into there, we have something quite magical.
Which is so. I was going to say one of the things that's strangest about that is, the cinematographer on Dracula, as I'm sure you all know, is Carl Freund. You're talking about this visual powerhouse. The man that shot Metropolis and then went on to direct The Mummy and Mad Love and all this stuff. And of course, revolutionized TV with I Love Lucy. You're talking about this visually brilliant man. And I think what is visually striking about Dracula is probably due more to him than to Browning. With all due respect to Browning.
And also, what you have to understand is Carl Freund was so beloved that how often does a cinematographer get to be a director and then go to television? Everybody from his beginning of the career to TV called him Papa. That's what they called him. They didn't call him Carl. He was Papa because he was the father on the set. It's just so sweet that he was so loved by everybody.
So I want to jump in now, and I think we're hearing a little bit of feedback.
Yeah,
so
I think it's Perry. Perry, it might be coming from you because I muted you for a moment. Oh, wait a minute. We've got something exciting happening right now.
What's happening?
No, we don't. We don't have anything exciting happening right now.
Okay.
Mr. Producer is in the wings.
All right.
Working on our problem. But,
Thank you. Okay.
The Spanish language Dracula was directed by George Melford. And George Robinson was a cinematographer.
Thank you, Billy.
Wonderful job.
So I want to jump in and talk about, so now Universal is stunned, shocked, impressed, amazed that they have an absolute hit on their hands, as are the other studios. The other studios are saying, whoa, what's going on there? They were taking a little bit of a wait and see, but not entirely, because then they decided they were going to move on and do a follow-up, and it was going to be Frankenstein. Now, who can talk a little bit about whether, again, we talk about apocryphal tales or not, about this idea that, okay, well, we have our star, we have this guy, Bela Lugosi. We know what you do when you have a star, and you groom them and you put them in the next vehicle. And of course, the tale I've always been told, and it's not one of the things I got to thoroughly research this week, which is that Lugosi was offered the role, turned it down because there weren't enough lines, and therein that made unhappy friends at Universal did not treat him particularly well in the decade to come. Stan, you want to check?
Oh, absolutely. Not only was Lugosi offered the role, he did a screen test. And unfortunately, the screen test, based on the makeup that was used, was makeup that made him look more like from Waxworks. You know, it was all clay. And at the end of the screening of the screen test, I think Perry, it was Ivor Novello who filmed it. And apparently when it was over, Lugosi screamed, "Ivor, my close-up was magnificent." But it was so stodgy. And then
hold on, Stan, pause for 1 second. Perry, will you do me a favor? Keep yourself muted unless you're talking, because there's some feedback issue. Thanks. That's great. Okay, go on, Stan.
I think what happened was the screen test, you know, they were going to go with it initially, but Lugosi did what George Raft did. He basically said, "I want a lot of money for this." And it was ridiculous sums of money. And so they decided not to go with that. And I believe it was James Whale that was sitting in the Universal
commissary, I think. Yeah, he saw Karloff and was so struck by his face.
Having lunch. So what happened was Karloff was asked to do the screen test, and Karloff, and the way I personally feel about this, and I'm going backwards, if anyone deserved the Oscar for Best Actor in 31, it was Karloff for that incredible performance as the monster.
Oh, good crisis. I mean, and you could almost say the same for most of Karloff's major performances from the 30s. I mean, there's such a gargantuan snobbery in the Academy Awards traditionally towards fantastic film. I mean, that there is one exception that we'll get into. But as I get older, I mean, Karloff is one of those great artists who you love as a kid. And as you get older, you realize they're even more brilliant than you expected. And when you see them with modern audiences on a big screen, you see just what a powerhouse he was. The guy he's like James Cagney in the sense that he's just absolutely magnificent screen actor. Magnificent.
Absolutely. And I was just watching one of the films we'll talk about in just a little bit, Mask of Fu Manchu. And even in a film like that, you forget a lot of the pathos and heart Karloff has to see him do someone who's, but because he has that in him, he makes the character somehow three-dimensional. But we'll get to that in just a moment. What I'd like to get to next, actually, is that while this was going on, mind you, it wasn't just Universal that was trying to capitalize on the success of Dracula, because in order for Paramount to have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in theaters on January 3rd, 1932, which is just 2 months after Frankenstein, it must mean that they were certainly working on it simultaneous to Frankenstein during 1931. Again, saying, okay, well, Dracula was successful. What else can we get from classic horror literature? Again, we still have to talk about when was the first time they used the word horror movie, and maybe it's as easy as searching on Google to find that out. But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Ruben Mamoulian, talk about a great visual stylist who knew how to move a camera. Who, one of the things the audience really, I want to impress upon the audience is that, and we showed this in our first show, is just how alive the camera was in silent cinema, particularly the latter part of silent cinema, particularly the latter half of the 1920s. They were just revving up this beautiful language of film, and then they had to put a screeching brake on it because of the sound era and the sound equipment. And so a lot of people who don't know early film and who have some issue with of creakiness, really they're referring to maybe dropping in on a movie from the very early 1930s that felt very stage-bound and very boxy and not a lot of cinema in their cinema. And it's amazing the evolution film took through those first few years of the 30s. But someone like Ruben Mamoulian, and you think of Hitchcock as well. James Whale was a quick learner. when you go from Frankenstein to Bride, when you go from Frankenstein.
Fritz Lang. Fritz Lang.
Fritz Lang.
Absolutely incredible. But I think, sorry, I was going to interrupt for one second. The thing that makes the incredible visual stylishness of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde all the more powerful looking back on it is how gargantuan the cameras were. Yeah. They were gargantuan. They were huge, and they were much harder to move. And it's astonishing how fluid and inventive and visual that film is. I think it's the best movie version of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that nobody knows, or everybody who's done all these versions, and I don't think anyone at Paramount ever knew, is that if I'm not mistaken, in the John Barrymore, there isn't a thing of his fiance and a prostitute, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
So here's the thing: Paramount lost a lot of money never collecting from all of the films that came after that thought they were freely adapting Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, when in fact they were doing a remake of Paramount's 1932 Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, because there is no prostitute, there is no fiance. It's rather unfilmable as written. It's first person from his lawyer, Mr. Utterson. And then there's a point where he discovers his diary, and then we flash back and go forward. It's rather unfilmable. Only the Christopher Lee I Monster is maybe the closest correct adaptation of it. But the interesting thing is that I think because nobody at movie, the joke would be that no movie executives actually read books, and so they have no idea all these years. They
read the classics illustrated version, and I think also in the novel, Hyde is like he's shrinking and he's like shrinking and he's smaller, and I think he's like 4.5 or 5 feet tall. It's like and it just does, and he's becoming kind of more ape-like and so forth, but he's just smaller and smaller and smaller.
Well, Frederick
which again was unfilmable.
Frederick March is extraordinary in it. He is still one of the most underrated great actors, film actors we've ever had. He was giving modern, quote unquote, modern performances in the 30s. The Eagle and the Hawk. He did so many amazing, subtle, thoughtful performances. I mean, his career of vital roles spanned the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and am I correct? The early 70s or no? Or late 70s?
Yes, he did Last Exit. As a matter of fact, he's a 2-time Academy Award winner. He won for Jekyll and Hyde, and he won for Best Youth of Our Lives in '46.
Right, exactly. I mean, he's phenomenal as an actor, and I think he gives an extraordinary performance. He's both good and sexy as Dr. Jekyll in a very organic way that doesn't feel not period, and he is a ruthless, and it's a beautiful makeup. Who did the Perry? This is your question for you, Perry. Let's unmute yourself. Who did the makeup on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde?
I believe it was Wally Westmore.
Was it? Okay, that's what I was going to say.
I was going to say. I knew it was one of the Westmores. The other thing about it is it was interesting. Ruben Mamoulian talked about the way he approached that performance, and he said at first he wanted him to be. He's funny. He's comic. He's kind of like almost like this sort of animalistic creature. This like a satyr or something. Who's all excited and kind of silly. And then he gets meaner and darker and nastier and worse. And it's one of those movies like, years later was it Picture of Dorian Gray, Lewin's Picture of Dorian Gray, where usually in movies when they show the wages of sin or they show somebody sinning or doing terrible things, like there's kind of a vicarious pleasure in it, but that's not the case in Dr. Jekyll. It's kind of nasty and horrible.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a film that very much exists in the pre-code era. There's a lot of skin. We will show. I think we'll wait just a little bit, but we have a wonderful montage of sex and perversion in pre-code horror, and a couple of shots from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and the wonderful performance. I'm blanking of
Miriam Hopkins.
Miriam Hopkins.
Champagne Lily is her name.
But I want to turn to
What's her name?
Miriam Hopkins.
Champagne.
If I can say one thing though, Stephen, as far as what Justin said. If you look at the Barrymore Jekyll and Hyde, he also kind of got worse and worse.
Yeah.
Makeup got worse and worse. So it's not that it was necessarily original with Mamoulian, but it was pronounced, Yeah.
But I think he was going for something very comical. At first he's almost silly. But
Yeah.
and he just gets he gets fouler and fouler and fouler.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
It becomes so clear that he's a sexual abuser.
Yeah.
yeah, no, he's a monster. He is a really twisted, horrible psycho. Yeah.
You can only imagine what kind of perversions go on in Ivy's bedroom. You know.
And you have film of it? You have film of the perversions? Please tell me.
Yeah, that's Jekyll and Hyde. That's John Barrymore. Yep.
It's wonderful. Yeah, one of the things you really realize just what a good actor Frederick March was is just how in touch he was with that side of himself and being able to play it because he was behind that makeup. I mean, I still, as someone who knows who Frederick March is, have a hard time looking at that image underneath me right now and realizing that is Frederick March. That's not Frederick March to this day. That's Mr. Hyde.
No, he changes his voice.
Yeah.
His voice is different. Everything's different.
It's an extraordinary performance. Now, I want to turn the next film over to one of our guests because among his many applications of his historian's knowledge, it has been working with many of the absolute highest auction houses and working with private collections of some extraordinary people. Justin Humphries worked with the Todd Browning collection, and Todd Browning being the director we just mentioned of Dracula, and also the film we're about to talk about, which is Freaks, which is Todd Browning's next film, which he did not at Universal, but at MGM. And I was hoping, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm hoping you could talk a little bit about the genesis of Freaks and what you know of Browning around this period.
Well, it's based on a short story called Spurs by Todd Robbins. It's Robbins, and it's a really good story, and it's very, very different. And and I don't want to give away the ending, which is wonderful. I mean, when you read it, you'll never forget. Just like the film, you'll never forget it, but for different reasons. But it's basically I don't quite know when Browning got attached to it, but it was a perfect continuation of all of these films he'd made in the 20s with Lon Chaney that involved mutilation, deformity, the severely handicapped, sideshows, circuses, which he of course had a background in. And I see someone says Freaks was a truly disturbing movie. I would agree, and I think Freaks is also. I'll digress for just a second. Freaks is also a perfect example of how so many of these movies, so many of these great movies we're talking about, are about just how rotten human beings can be and how totally sympathetic monsters are. I mean, I think they're great for kids in the sense that, I mean, they definitely built up my sense of empathy as a child. I mean, what kid doesn't love the Frankenstein monster or pity these poor sideshow attractions in Freaks? And actually, to make what really is kind of disturbing in hindsight about Freaks, and I cataloged Browning's photo archive, which was like 2,000 photos. I mean, he kept it in great shape. Is that the staff and actors, everybody at MGM were so appalled by the circus freaks, they made them go and sit off by themselves, and I think it was it was behind some flat, behind something on the back lot or something. They had there was a photo of a big long table where they were all eating because they were so disgusted by them, which sort of hammers home the movie's message.
Let me jump in for a moment because there isn't a person I know who doesn't watch Freaks and isn't moved by it, because ultimately it's a very moving story. It's ultimately not exploitative. What's fascinating to me historically is that Universal has these hits of these Gothic period horror of Dracula and Frankenstein. And so the other studios say, let's put our toe in the water. And Paramount does Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And Freaks, which comes out from MGM in February 20th, 1932. Louis B. Mayer, there are more stars at MGM than there are in heaven, who likes family films, who likes films with a happy ending. Somehow, and I haven't read up on this, how on earth was he convinced that his first step into horror would be something more horrific than anyone had ever seen, and for a film that would ultimately be banned and not screened for many, many years? Did he not know what he was getting himself into? Do you have any insight on that, Stan, or from your
Irving Thalberg? He's the one that made the decisions. Mayer just went along.
Gotcha. So he
Well,
was
then
very impressed with Browning. Brought Browning over. Said, who brought Spurs to MGM? Did MGM have Spurs and bring it to Browning, or Browning brought it to MGM?
I don't know, because Browning, he was an interesting guy. Like, I know one of the other properties he wanted to do around then was I think it was a little later, was They Shoot Horses, Don't They? I mean, I think
Wow.
he may have been bringing them in himself, but it was such a grotesque miscalculation, like a total miscalculation. I mean, it basically, as you all know, it effectively ruined his career, hurt his career horribly, the way that Peeping Tom did for Michael Powell years later.
Is it true that Louis B. Mayer was so disgusted he kept Todd Browning under contract, but then didn't hire him to do anything, and he just whiled away his time up in Malibu?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I mean, obviously Justin will know this. Mayer let Dwayne Esper re-release the movie later on, and Dwayne Esper is the king of the
sleazy,
oh,
like
we'll
maniac.
Talk about him at the end of the show for sure. And now, mind you, while this was going on, one day after Freaks came out, if the internet is to be trusted, one day after Freaks came out, because clearly they weren't working on a Friday only release schedule back in the day. One day after Freaks came out, on February 21st, 1932, Universal released their third film of this era. After Dracula and Frankenstein, they released their next and last Bela Lugosi solo starring vehicle, if I'm not mistaken, which was Murders in the Rue Morgue, directed by Robert Florey, which is, again, trying to think about the literary adaptation and going to Edgar Allan Poe. It was not a box office success, and I think but when one looks at it, it's probably the boldest, darkest. It's where Universal swung. Universal always had this pendulum of a balance between horror and humor. No, wait, not there. We're not there.
Humor.
No, this is Murders in the Rue Morgue.
Sorry.
Not Murders in the Zoo. Murders in the Rue Morgue.
I know.
There's the thing in Murders in the Rue Morgue. The scene that I always remember most vividly is where the ape goes into the room with the girl and shut the door, and something absolutely horrible is happening, and it's worse than anything they could show. Anything.
Yeah, and what they do show is very much like the Black Cat, which we'll discuss shortly. Is this whole notion of off camera but kind of on camera torture is in this movie. Which go ahead, Perry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's important to say here too, harkening back to Frankenstein, that all the stuff about Lugosi, rejecting the monster role. Robert Florey was attached to direct it at that time, so Florey was going to direct Frankenstein with Lugosi, and for whatever reasons that fell through. But Murders in the Rue Morgue was like the
consolation prize.
Exactly.
Yeah, Florey was really. Oh, sorry. No, he was well established, but he and Rudolph Valentino were good buddies, and he'd done a lot of big movies. But it's weird. I have very little paper on posters or anything on original classic Universal stuff, but I have a program from some theater and Frankenstein's on it, and it lists the director as John Stahl, of all people. It's like this totally wrong thing. And I wanted to throw in one more thing. Going back to Freaks for just a second, I did want to say one of my favorite discoveries going through Todd Browning's scrapbooks was he saved one of his own worst reviews for Freaks. He saved it and put it in his scrapbook. It was Variety or Hollywood Reporter, and it was just, they like nuked it. And there was one line in particular that I will never, ever, ever forget. It's something like, it leaves a brown taste in your mouth. And that does not sound nice at all. But he did save it and put it in his scrapbook. But so back Murders in the Rue Morgue, yeah.
So we're going to limit ourselves because they're to American and a few British English language films. There's obviously a whole other show we could do on what went on in foreign language cinema at this time. But now we kind of we jump over to sort of independent cinema, as it were, released by United Artists. In the summer of 1932, on August 4th, We have a White Zombie, Lugosi having a starring vehicle, but not in a Universal film, not in an MGM film, not in a Paramount film, not in a Warner's film, but in a grand national film released through United Artists. And I want to say one of the things we're going to do, we're going to put up into the feed is, since White Zombie is in public domain, there is actually, I finally saw it in something that looks like HD without crackling awful audio, in a lovely HD version that exists on YouTube, and put it up on my big TV. And I really realized, wow, the film isn't as creaky as we think it is. It's only creaky because of the print qualities that have existed all the times that I was watching it. So I highly recommend people taking a look. It's the first. Certainly the first most. I don't think is it arguably the first zombie film, or is it the first zombie film that we've ever had?
The first with that word in the title, anyway.
Yeah, that's certainly, yes. White Zombie, Victor Halperin, August 8th, 1932. Lugosi, again, another striking makeup. He was very unique.
That beard, that funny little Klingon kind of beard. And,
yeah, absolutely.
It should be noted that Jack Pierce did his makeup.
That's right. I noticed it. For the first time, I noticed his credit buried in there. So he was not under contract Universal. He could freelance and go over somewhere else at that point.
No, he never signed Jack Pierce never signed a contract with Universal.
Wow.
But he, Lugosi wouldn't let him do his makeup on Dracula. Legend is that Pierce had nothing to do with Lugosi's makeup on Dracula, but he did allow him to do his makeup on White Zombie, because I think by then, the makeup union was starting to develop, and where actors were accustomed to doing their own makeup, especially Lon Chaney, silent days, that was giving way to the makeup unions. And so
look how simple and extraordinary this is, and the use of Lugosi's face. I mean, he took Lugosi's face, which already was so iconic from Dracula, and created a brand new creation. Plus, you have the hat atop that often, and this wonderful use of his eyes throughout the movie. It's quite a strong film. It's zombies in the voodoo sense. These are not zombies from the George Romero sense, or certainly from the running zombies of The Walking Dead. But it is about creating a curse on those who are still living, so that they become zombies. They become zombified, as it were, to do someone else's bidding, to live under someone else's spell as a form of revenge or punishment. And it's quite a strong film. Beautiful to look at, and we'll discuss soon how Victor Halperin got a shot the next year doing a film for a major studio. But moving on to there, we have Warner Brothers entering this.
Hang on, if I may, Stephen.
Yes.
I'd like to show the curtain speech from Dracula.
Okay, we were going to do it.
I apologize.
We were going to do it at the end of the show.
Okay. All right,
at the end of the show.
You know what I like about the White Zombie is the Lugosi Stare.
Yeah.
But I think this is when he had perfected his stare, because if you watch Dracula, his first time on screen, it looks like it hurts him doing it. He's trying so hard. He's
okay.
Whatever. It looks like he must have a headache after every time he does it. And by now, it's less intense, but far more terrifying, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I did not want to interrupt because I was fascinated by all of the dialogue. And I was talking about Karloff in Frankenstein, and we jumped so far ahead. And I said, I'm interested in what's happening. But I do want to say that I'm loving Justin's dialogue about everything he's talking about. I'm loving it. So quite quickly, when we get to the end of the show, bring me back to Dracula. Because
okay, we will. Oh yeah, yes, we will. I have
and real quick, now before we're still in 1931. Well, 32. What about Dreyer's Vampire?
Well, it's funny. That's why I was trying to keep us on a schedule. I have it written down. So yes, let's just 3 months before Vampire opened. No, I'm sorry. In the USA, it opened just after White Zombie. White Zombie opened on August 4th. On August 14th in the USA. Now, mind you, this had come out 2 years earlier. I'm sorry. No, this had come out. No, let me correct myself. In Germany, Vampire, Carl Theodor Dreyer's Vampire came out in 1932 in Germany. It didn't come out in the U.S. until 2 years later in 1934. But let's talk about it now. It is a fever dream. It is an extraordinary film. It's a film that tests the patience of modern horror viewers. I was on a forum on Facebook, and I had to school a bunch of people who were flaunting, who thought it was some sort of point of honor to decide that they didn't like Vampire. And then I kind of opened the floodgates for others who were kind of standing idly by while a bunch of young people were saying this movie sucks.
Well, of course, I mean, the fact that they would say that about Rudolph Mette's cinematography and that, or any of his other Dreyer movies, shows that they have the attention span and the brains of gnats. And you can quote.
Attention span is the key here, and I think it is a hallucinogenic film. It's a film. There are no two films like Vampire. And
dreamlike. It's totally dreamlike, and that's the intention.
It is the film, and a lot of films aspire to it, and many films achieve it on one level or another, or a segment of a film. You know, Roger Corman used to do that all the time in his pose. He'd have these dream sequences, and he had very specific references. He actually really worked on those sequences. But as far as a film maintaining a dream, that the logic of a dreamlike from beginning to end. You know, Orson Welles talked about his film The Trial, that he tried to do that with The Trial, the logic of a dream, and I think a logic of a nightmare is what Vampire has. I mean, any image, if Billy were to search Vampire, Vampyr, every image is takes your breath away.
I agree completely, and I think you look at that and you look at Passion of Joan of Arc that Dreyer and Matte did together, and it's just it's just like, you know, it's like Murnau's Faust. It's like every image is so powerful and so strong and so intense and so beautifully composed, and that gauziness, and the one of the moments in it that most strikes me is where, you know, how in so many horror movies over the decades, there's usually a scene where like the woman becomes a vampire and a vampiress, and all of a sudden she becomes somehow animalistic or something. The Sybil Schmitz in Vampire, when she becomes a vampire, that look of animal like lust and hunger on her face is so real and so creepy in a way that's like more genuine than almost any other similar scene I can think of in horror.
Well, before we move on to Dr. X, then I think, Billy, this is a good time to why don't we show our next montage, which we have labeled Sex, Skin, and Perversion in pre-code horror. Why don't we take a look at that?
I will. I just love the look of Vampire, and it's like silent cinema. If you remember that you said that, you know, with these giant, you know, to make the sound work, you know, to actually have sound, the cameras got so huge because they had to attach, you know, the recording equipment to the camera. And it's just it's one of them films that there's so many beautiful.
It originated, or certainly brought into the pop culture zeitgeist, which has never been done better. The idea of being buried alive, and the idea of actually being able to witness your own funeral. He's buried in the coffin. There's a glass panel, and his eyes are open, and he's watching the people as how anyone could ever see that moment in a film and be disinterested in the motion picture is stunning and shocking to me. It's a little reactionary. I mean, look, I remember when I went to NYU and was told all these films of the French New Wave were great. I remember folding my arms and going, "No, they're not, man," you know, because it felt like I needed it to be reactionary. So I get it. There are people who do it are young. They're going to regret saying it and then look back. It's going to be part of their growth. They'll go, "Wow, this really truly was a great movie." So Billy,
they're the same ones that will say, "Oh, Citizen Kane's so pretentious."
Yeah,
they're morons, you know, for the time being.
So why don't we put that next montage up, Billy, so I can refill my drink when it's in front of my face?
Yes, it's one of my favorites too, because I love the Kong sequence with Fay Wray, as we all did.
There we go. Sex, perversion, sex, skin, and perversion pre-code. You will not see any of these things for the next 20 years on American screens.
Enjoy.
Now listen, Ann. I'm on the level. No funny business. Look. Relaxing.
And I prayed and left them with their lustful red and white women.
A Roman lady. Getting off the bull and scratching yourself.
Well, can't a Roman lady itch?
The whips. Faster! 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 Faster!
Hello, sweetheart.
Oh, hello.
How's your sex life? Uh-oh.
As many of our mutual friend Alan K. Rody, the historian, said on his commentary track for Mystery of the Wax Museum, "How's your sex life?" was a line that would not be uttered again in American cinema for at least 20 years.
By the great Glenda Farrell. I mean, she's so good.
Yeah.
One of the things, Steve and I have talked about this before. One of the really fascinating things, if you love 30s movies, about Mystery of the Wax Museum is it's such a Warner Brothers movie. You have this whole modern street smart newspaper comedy going alongside this modern American Gothic. And I think Glenda Farrell is one of those actors like Lee Tracy that barely anybody knows anymore, who's just like a lightning bolt. I mean, she is fantastic. And anybody that says like there weren't like tough, sassy, independent, cool women's roles in the past doesn't know their history. I mean, really, like, she's
Frank Solon.
Perry, can you mute yourself again until you speak?
Sorry.
It's okay. So actually, one of the things I want to talk about is the a film very, very related to A Mystery of the Wax Museum, which we'll get to. Is some of you who are not familiar with what they call two-strip Technicolor, you noticed a couple of color images in both of our montages. And in our early one, you saw a kind of creepy guy doing this and fixing his hair and his face in this very early version of Technicolor. And that was Dr. X, directed by the great Michael Curtiz, who would go on to make some of the great classics of film history, American film, Casablanca, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Mildred Pierce, so many great films. And Dr. X was in this version of two-strip Technicolor. Oh no, I'm sorry. I leapt ahead. My apologies. I did skip over. No, I didn't. Because Dr. X came first, and it was Mystery of the Wax Museum was later. That was in early '33. So Dr. X, which came out in August 27, 1932, from Warner's, is a totally bizarre tale that might as well be out of EC Comics. It is about this gruesome killer. Cannibalistic killer. Again, we would not see a killer defined as a cannibal in motion pictures and American screens for 20 years, and maybe I'm being a little too conservative with that. It may be more than 20 years. But this killer is a cannibal. He takes human flesh in order to create a synthetic flesh. It becomes a bit of a crazy Agatha Christie tale where it's a whole bunch of doctors who are all warped beings. Again, they use that same gag about, we discovered his porno magazine in that film, as well as in the Warner Brothers film that came out later that year that we saw the clip of, with the cop reading because cops were treated with much more reverence and respect. That was part of the production code too. You could not, in the scene that we just saw, they come into the police station and the cops are just like lazing around, feet up, smoking, reading magazines, and that became verboten. If you're going to show a cop, they had to be doing their job and doing it well, and that was the case until film noir came around. I would say, cops had to be heroes, or they weren't in your movies. So yes, go ahead. Who's someone?
I was just going to say the thing about the pre-code was one thing we should throw in is part of the reason that the Hays Code came to be was during as films developed, as they grew in popularity in the 20s and 30s, there were so many. America was a much more religious country. It was a much more religious place, and there were so many citizens groups that were popping up and saying these movies are immoral, they're terrible, they're a bad influence on everybody. And there was always a kind of feeling that these movies were unchristian, they were wicked, they were something that was coming from the big cities to pollute the little towns, you know, things like that. And so, of course, there was that whole list of forbidden subjects, like Steve said, you know, like you had to show reverence for cops, and there couldn't be drugs, and there couldn't be this, and there couldn't be that. And but yeah,
wasn't the Hays?
Who's that one? We got
it's me. I apologize.
Okay.
Wasn't the Hays office also partly due to the antics of Hollywood, of the stars themselves?
Yeah, I think they thought that.
Starting with the, Fatty Arbuckle, and then the suicides.
Yes, it was a reaction. Hayes was the former Republican national chairman.
Yeah, Harding's guy.
Yeah, and he was brought in to run this. Yes, the 20s, we'd had the Fatty Arbuckle scandal. We had a number of scandals. This idea that Hollywood was this sort of unbridled island of depravity, and it needed to be reined in. And again, we still had notes on censorship and so forth that went on in the early 30s. Certainly Frankenstein, about when he picks up the little girl Maria and throws her in and she drowns. That was 1934.
And Freaks. A lot of the end of Freaks was recut.
So they recut that for concerns. They obviously King Kong, notoriously, what we just saw of him, the quote unquote rape of Fay Wray, that was lost to moviegoers, including, if I'm not mistaken, Stan, the release itself did not have it in 1933, or was it stricken after that?
No, it was after that. It was in 33, and it was found in the late 60s.
So it was stricken for re-releases in 38 and so forth going forward?
Just like the Dracula curtain speech was cut out.
Mm-hmm.
Once the Hays, the production code in 1934, once that came in, a lot of films were cut.
Mm-hmm.
And things, unfortunately, never came back in.
Mm-hmm.
For Universal, when Carl lost the studio, even though he made Dracula, the new people, in order to re-release Dracula, they cut out the curtain speech, and they never knew about it until we found out about it 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And of course, in the case of King Kong, there's also the infamous spider pit sequence, which has been this gigantic focus of interest for decades and decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was like either like Ray Bradbury or Ray Harryhausen saw it, supposedly, somebody like that. I can't remember, but the photos and everything make it look absolutely fascinating. Like it was this terrifying, awful scene, where Carl Denham's men are shaken off the log, fall into the valley below, and they're eaten by these horrible insects and spiders and centipedes.
Well, let's talk about that.
Things.
On the subject, we have RKO's 2 entries into this period, and they are. It's debatable. You certainly see both of them on lists of horror films. You undoubtedly see them on lists of horror films. They were considered horrifying, shocking, and frightening in their times. And the first one would have come out in September of 1932, which was Most Dangerous Game, directed by one of the co-directors of and starring Fay Wray as well, which of course is that the old chestnut that has been done and redone and probably was done as some sort of direct to DVD or direct to streaming movie probably a week ago Tuesday, which is the idea of man being hunted by man for sport.
Yeah.
And it's I just rewatched it for the first time in a long while. I watched the Ray Harryhausen supervised colorization, which isn't bad, except it only exists on DVD and it's not a particularly high quality DVD, so it doesn't hold up particularly well on our big flat screen TVs. It's okay. It didn't distract because they used a very good master. But what do you guys think? Is it by today? Do we think of it as a horror film?
Most Dangerous Game?
Most Dangerous Game?
Kind of pushing it. It's sort of it's more of a suspense movie. But the thing is, I mean, they're filming on in the Kong jungles.
Yeah.
So it has such a similar look, and it's so atmospherically shot. And also the mounted heads.
Mm-hmm.
The mounted heads are like, that's pure horror movie paraphernalia. And of course, they're so good they reused them when RKO did Game of Death, when Robert Wise did Game of Death in the 40s. But
it's a beautiful.
It has all the trappings.
Yeah, it's a very short film. It moves fast. When you watch it, there's a lot of build up to the hunt, and that it's going to be really a matching of wits. But when you get to the hunt, it ain't much a matching of wits. It's just Joel McCrea and Fay Wray running.
Yeah,
that's pretty much it. It's still great because the actors are great and it's beautiful. And the Max Steiner score, that's what's really beautiful is now we have finally, we just talked about this, how it was either stock music or it was classical music. Max Steiner shows up for The Most Dangerous Game, which kind of foreshadows what he's going to do with King Kong, which is bring to horror and suspense films a score written to picture, which you really didn't see in a significantly powerful way before The Most Dangerous Game. If you watch Most Dangerous Game for anything, it's to really put a pause on what you take for granted as movie watchers and just take a look and see, wow, this is where it all began, and see how glorious that score is and how it enhances a film that's barely over an hour. It's like 65 minutes or something. It's fairly short film, but boy, does it look good, and boy, does it sound good.
Well, the whole film seems to be a solenoid dress rehearsal for one of the greatest movies of all time.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
the effects work, the matte work.
Yeah. Thank goodness he said, "I'm going to make The Most Dangerous Game," instead of saying, "Let's make King Kong."
Yeah,
leading into what it was for.
Mm-hmm.
And just I want to say, John, we have some fantastic questions.
Please,
in the comment section. When we're done, we might.
Oh boy, I just saw
we might go back to some of the questions because we got some really interesting questions, really interesting comments. You know, you got some cinefans here that have done some things and partook in it, and I hope you guys will stick around for, I don't know, 5 minutes or so after we end.
Of course, absolutely.
I think so.
Feel free to pop one on. I agree with Fizz Pop that Fay Wray is one of those beautiful actresses from that time period. I would just say from that time period. Because I just watched her in 3 films in a row. Not only the beautiful restoration that was done of Murders in the Rue Morgue. And here in LA, I think I just heard a gunshot outside my window. Hopefully not through my window. But Dr. X, and also a film that we're going to take a look at. I did not rewatch King Kong because I did not have to add a 753rd viewing to it for this show. But also a film that I had never seen before, which we'll get to, a 1934 film called Black Moon. And she truly is. She's wonderful. She's charming. She's beautiful. She is a movie star, and she is.
And I think Stan, you wanted to say something?
Yeah.
Oh, I was when you were talking about, you know, all these great movies that we're watching here, I cannot believe that we have not gotten past 1932 and 33 already.
It was that good. That period was that good.
Yeah,
the other thing I'm going to add about Fay Wray. I'll say this about Fay Wray.
We haven't hold on.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What I wanted to say was, in the last 6 months, people have been purchasing Mystery of the Wax Museum from Warner Archive, and it sold out, and they had to reprint it.
That's
and
right.
I just wanted to give a shout out to, I worked with him. He's a hero to me. I've been to his house. Scott McQueen, the head of preservation at UCLA Film and Television Archive, is the guy that was behind Mystery of the Wax Museum, and that's why we are watching it so beautifully as a 2-color Technicolor print. He didn't try to enhance it to make it 3-color.
Oh no, that would be
No, and he's been such a great patron of that film for so long.
Yeah, I highly recommend people get a hold of that beautiful Blu-ray. It's a beautifully made film. You will learn so much about film history listening to Alan K. Rohde's commentary track. I actually wound up late at night, which a lot of us do who are cinephiles who get these Blu-rays. We watch the whole film. It's a little late. We say, I'm just going to dip into 10 minutes of the commentary. And the next thing we know, we watch the whole freaking movie again.
One thing I want to add about... Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was just going to say about Fay Wray very, very quickly. Her autobiography, on the other hand, is maybe the best actress's autobiography I've ever read.
Well, good to know.
It's so fascinating. It's so well written. Her stories, and not just about, the classics that we love, but, her marriage to Robert Riskin and working with Erich von Stroheim and everything else. And she writes beautifully, absolutely beautifully. It's a really, really good book, and I strongly recommend it.
To answer Stan's question, 32 is actually the chalk full year of this period. I wouldn't have realized it until I actually put it all down. I truly didn't realize it until this moment in my life, having been such an aficionado of horror, sci-fi, and fantasy. When I went, wow, that is actually the bulkiest year. After this, we have in October 20th, just in time for Halloween, James Whale does his follow-up to Frankenstein, his first film, which is The Old Dark House.
Another beautiful video restoration.
Just for the audience out there, I just want to post this picture of Fay Ray.
Yes.
My goodness, Jiminy Crickets.
But we saw a couple of images from Old Dark House in the opening. It's Karloff in that very creepy makeup. It is following through on a genre that there it is on the left with Gloria Stewart. Those of you who only know the old woman from Titanic, well, take a look. She was a movie star in the 1930s. That is her, starring in some classics of this era, including The Invisible Man, which we'll get to somehow tonight.
Yeah. My wife and I had dinner with Gloria Stewart at Cinecon. She sat next to us, and my wife was saying, "Who's that woman?" And I said, "Oh, honey, that's Gloria Stewart. I mean, this is The Invisible Man. This is The Old Dark House." Until I said, "That's the one who was the older cousin of Shirley Temple in Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm," my wife went ballistic. And all of a sudden we're talking about Shirley
Temple. Yes.
And for those people who are watching who have seen my favorite year, Gloria Stewart.
Yeah, she dances with Peter O'Toole. She dances.
Right.
It's the wedding anniversary. That's right.
Thank you, Justin. You get 12 points. You would have gotten 20, but I would have said it. But you get 20. Not one line in the movie in my favorite year. But
that's right, and she's wonderful in it. She's absolutely wonderful in it. So let's talk about that being James Whale's first, his follow-up that comes out one full year later after Frankenstein. This is his follow-up for Universal. He's working on a trope that had been around from the silent era, which is the Old Dark House, which had already been transcended from genuinely scary movies into comedy already at this point. And I would say, and especially evident in the beautiful restoration that has only recently surfaced. Because Universal sort of just let the film fall away. Was it not? It was not a success, right? It was
No. Let me explain.
Tell us why this is not part of the Universal horror canon.
Okay. Well, the film was remade with, among other people, Tom Poston, and Universal had to relinquish the rights to the film. And when they did that, they kept the negative, but they did not own the rights. So the film kept getting re-released in poor quality, except God bless Scott McQueen, who was able to print a 16 millimeter print from the original negative, and it came out on Laserdisc in the 90s. And I went to Scott's house, and he had the print on his desk, and a very dear friend of mine said, "What's that?" And Scott said what it was, and he said, "Is it available for sale?" And Scott said, "Yeah." Before I could even take a breath, my friend bought it, and he has it in his collection. God bless him. But then, because of Raymond Rohauer, the guy that re-edited all the Buster Keaton features and re-copywrote them and screwed them up, he owned the rights to the Old Dark House. But it's only recently that they were able to finagle a deal, and that's why we can see the Old Dark House the way it was originally seen.
So the Roan Group's DVD, Blu-ray, is that looks like it's from 35. You're saying that's from 16 or no? That's
It was Raymond Rohauer. It was the Laserdisc.
Oh, okay. But the recent version, the one that gorgeous Blu-ray that's out now, which I highly recommend. In my opinion,
it's fantastic.
Opinion, there is that it is on a par with James Whale's best work. When I actually saw, I'd always liked the film. Don't get me wrong. But when I saw it without the distractions of a crappy version, I
think also it's like you're basically seeing the inspiration for Charles Addams. I always suspected that I can't confirm or deny this, but it's like Charles Addams before Charles Addams. It's got that great macabre sense of humor.
In watching The Old Dark House, I watched the prerequisite for Bride of Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you watch The Bride of Frankenstein, it's the ultimate. You know, what he began in Frankenstein, and he went to Old Dark House, he goes to Bride of Frankenstein, and he goes so far that he never goes that far again, because after the pre-code ended, he had to be careful. And he was unfortunately holstered and had to adhere to Hollywood after the
that's right. No, I think that's right. Yeah.
Even though we'll be talking about Bride of Frankenstein in our next show, and about from 35 onward, it still was sort of it's one of those films that bridges, right? Because it was in production during when the code was coming in, so they got away with a little bit more than you would normally get away with in a 1935 movie.
Well, I don't know, Stephen. I think I'm looking forward to part 2 of pre-code Hollywood film, 1933 to 1934.
We may have to end with The Mummy and do that. Billy.
Yeah, I think if you guys could come back, because this is fascinating.
Well,
this is like the golden age. It's such a great era.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, 1932. My goodness. I mean, it's sucking all the air out of the room.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's incredible. Karloff's amazing. Ernest, it's a story. Thessingers. One of the things about this movie is that, you know, I know a writer who always preaches this idea that to other writers when they're teaching them is audiences are expecting you to take the right turn, so take the left turn. And this movie takes the left turn all the time. I mean, it just keeps taking left turns. You're like, wait, what? What's coming next? Is this really who's upstairs? Is this really the old guy? Is this really the lady? Why does this old woman have a mustache? Is it played by a man? What is this movie doing? It's insane.
You know, one thing I really love. We're all kvetching about David Manners, and justifiably so. I mean, one of the beauties of The Old Dark House is you actually have a really solid leading man. You have Melvin Douglas, who's wonderful, has this kind of like William Powell-like sense of humor. And he has one of my favorite lines in the whole movie is where, they knock on the door, and I'm not giving anything away here. They knock on the door to the Old Dark House, and Karloff comes to the door and goes, blah, 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 and grunts or something, and Melvin Douglas goes, even Welsh shouldn't be spoken like that. It's wonderful. It's like really witty, erudite writing. It's a wonderful.
Steve, you've got this great bridge of you've got Karloff and Thesiger, who are also in The Ghoul, which is a Brit. Then, of course, they're back in Bride of Frankenstein, but you got Charles Lawton, who in 1932 does The Island of Lost Souls. So again, like, there's so much in this period that's just concentrated, like you said, of 1932 has got all these great actors doing.
It's really tremendous. I mean, even Karloff, they even surprise you and take the left turn with Karloff. You think he's going to be the ultimate villain of the film, and they actually keep you on guard during this period. If someone was the villain, they were the villain. If someone was a hero, they were the hero. And these are truly wonderful films. I'm even referencing when I say that Karloff. It's like, oh, he must be the bad guy. Oh no. There's other bad guys. Oh no, but then now he is the bad guy. Too much drinking him, he becomes it. So the movie, you're constantly trying to figure out what which feeds into this idea of being trapped in a house and a storm with people you don't know. You don't know who's friend or foe, and it keeps organically weaving all throughout. Then you have on top of that these wonderful actors, Charles Lawton. And I mean, we haven't even mentioned Charles Lawton's in this.
Oh no! Well, this is the astonishing thing about these great actors we're talking about, like during that era. Look at how different Lawton is in Island of Lost Souls versus The Old Dark House. Yeah. Just as if you look at Karloff in The Criminal Code and Scarface and Frankenstein and The Mummy and The Old Dark House, there's this incredible versatility at work. Incredible. Absolutely. I mean, he could either do all this great pantomime in Frankenstein, or a sort of brutishness and a sort of more restrained brutishness in The Old Dark House, or in The Mummy. He just stands there a lot of the time, and he is electrifying just standing there.
Yes,
I mean, these guys were capable of such versatility.
The Mummy, as we learned, was a Christmas release for Universal for 1932. But before we get to The Mummy, let's go rewind two films back to MGM again after the after the uncomfortableness it heaped upon the cinemas. in early 1932 with their first foray into cashing in on what Universal was doing with when they did Freaks. Now we come to November 5th, 1932, and movie theaters were treated to Mask of Fu Manchu, where they obviously wrested Karloff away from Universal. And if those of you who recall what we just watched, there were a lot of images of Karloff in quote unquote Asian makeup, and we saw faster, faster, whip, whip, whip. That's Myrtle Loy as his daughter, who is called by Karloff as many children are called. She's sometimes called by Karloff his beautiful daughter, sometimes called his ugly daughter. And you wonder why she had to go to psychiatrist the rest of her life. But she has clearly a fascination with, as her dad does, with sadism, with masochism. Here is Karloff, who somehow even he takes this role of a character who's purely evil, but because we know that underneath Karloff is there, he somehow is enjoyable to watch in this film. He's even empathetic. It's fascinating to watch him through a prism of today and all the complications going on with our understanding of our, and I'm not at all trying to get political here, but when he has his anger towards whites or Americans, I listen to it differently than I listened to it as a child. I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I just watched it literally 2 days ago. I'm like, wow, this is, of course, was not at all as intended to get the reaction it was getting from me when it came out. But I thought, but Karloff plays it real. He doesn't play it as a villain. He plays it as someone who's hurt. He plays it as someone who actually feels like he's been marginalized. And I only noticed that watching it 2 days ago.
You have pointed out an important thing about Karloff. If you watch The Monster in Frankenstein, if you watch Fu Manchu, if you watch The Black Room, which is Colombia, if you watch what he does, he makes every character he portrays human, which is why today, 80 years after Frankenstein, we understand it's an abnormal brain, we're told, but we see the human side of this monster, which is why when they talk about the great monster movies, I don't consider Frankenstein a monster movie, only because his performance is so human.
Yes.
We feel for him. Yep, he kills people, but because he was created, he wasn't told good from bad. When he kills Maria and he throws her, he's throwing her because he thinks she's like a flower, she'll float. And then when he realizes, that's why I've always said, even though in 1931, and you can look up the Best Picture nominees and the Best Actor nominees, Karloff gave the greatest single performance, tied with Cagney in Public Enemy. It's so human. 80 years later, we understand, or 90 years later, we understand. And that's why his three performances as the monster are so important to actors and to people who watch those movies today. And that's why they're timeless.
Right, because he doesn't play his idea of the character. He doesn't sit in judgment of characters. Again, this is not something that he's not the only actor who ever did it, but he certainly was a actor who did this in the realm of this genre earliest. Chaney obviously did it as well, which is he played the character from its point of view, not from some decision that I'm supposed to scare you, I'm supposed to be villainous, I'm supposed to be evil. He played it from its point of view, and it should still scare you, but not because of some falseness that I'm projecting.
And also the physicality.
I just want to let Perry, what were you just saying?
I was going to say this argument has been raised in with other fans. It makes the idea of the abnormal brain kind of unnecessary, because if you add the abnormal brain, it's just like Hollywood's way of justifying why he's a murderer. But you take that away, and he's simply reacting to his environment. It's nothing to do with normal.
He's a total victim of circumstance. One of the other great things about the performance is his physicality, like that thing he does with his wrists where the hands are jutting off like they weren't sewn on quite right. And he has that where it took out his bridges, I think, it would suck in his cheeks. He has that cadaverous look, that great, because I mean, what Whale really latched onto, I mean, it was the face, catching something in Karloff's face. Because I mean, he'd been a working actor for years and years and years, and of course, they always talk about how he worked as a truck driver and all that, and struggled. But
he was 46, right? He was 46.
He was middle aged. He was born 1887, so he would have been like what, 43, something like that.
40. But he was 40. He was 43 when he did Frankenstein. And I was going to mention, like an hour ago, when he went to the screen test. Forgive me, Justin.
By all means.
An hour ago, I was going to say he went to his dentist and had his temporaries pulled out, just so he could do the screen test, so his face was sunken in. And when Whale saw the screen test, he said, we are done. That's the guy. Because Karloff found the human part of the monster, and that's why it works so well today. So when you see Chaney and when you see Lugosi and Glenn Strange, as fine as they are, they don't have the heart and the human of the monster, because Karloff saw something that no one saw in the novel or the script or anything that led to what he portrayed. And that's why he called it his baby, and he wouldn't go back to do the fourth film, because he said, I've done everything.
Yep.
Yeah, you know what? Also, the amazing character arc of the monster. I mean, he starts off as a child. You know, the monster is a child. He is a newborn child in this 7 foot, 300-pound frame that's stitched together. And you see the arc from Frankenstein. You see the scene with Maria. You see the scene with the hermit. Then you go to the son of Frankenstein. He falls in love. Is he almost like a teenager now? You know, and then you go to Bride of Frankenstein. Then you go to 39 with the son of Frankenstein, and then you look at Lugosi playing him, Chaney playing him, and Glenn Strange. They're playing the adult monster, if you will.
I'll tell you this much, and I know that the young people watching, who knows, if Karloff had not played the monster and they had a lesser actor who just went in to perform the role, we might not have the Universal horror series we have today. We were lucky. We were lucky we had Chaplin. Chaplin gave us what comedy and film should be at an early age, and we have Karloff, who showed us how adult the quote-unquote horror film should be, because we had feeling for him. If we did not feel for Karloff, maybe we wouldn't care about Ghost of Frankenstein.
Absolutely.
Right, and I would say his Karloff's hand gestures, he uses all that in all three of his films. No other actor, Chaney, Lugosi, Strange never did that. But I think Karloff came up with that as a pantomimic way of,
and that pleading, that sort of that terrible, pitiful pleading, and the look in his eyes, the way his expression shift. I'll say this very briefly about Bride of Frankenstein. The way his expression shift, I'd say like the end of Bride of Frankenstein, or the scene where he's reaching up towards the sunlight. I mean, that's that's some of the greatest screen acting you will ever see. That's
because people don't realize, you know, people forget that Karloff had many silent films under his belt before he entered the sound era, and he learned his craft there, and he segued so beautifully into the sound era, holding on to the tools. And when he became Frankenstein, of course, clearly in the first film, in Frankenstein, he had no dialogue, and so it was he actually understood the power of stillness. Certainly, his entrance is a testament to that.
And his eyes, I mean, he's so selling it with his eyes, you know.
But even
it's
the
really
scenes
extraordinary.
like carrying the smoke and the joy. Oh, you smoke good, you know, like the joy. It's almost like you know, Comic Book Bob posted something like he's like an abandoned, abused child.
I agree with Comic Book Bob, an abandoned, abused child, and lashing out. Absolutely, it's a very, you know, simplicity is, you know, the great 60s, 70s screenwriter Waldo Salt used to say, he used to have a little thing up over where he wrote KISS, K-I-S-S. Keep it simple, stupid. In other words, anytime he was writing it, if he found himself going down a rabbit hole of complexity, he said, oh, keep it simple. And that's certainly what they were doing with this character. It's keeping it simple about what childhood is about what birth is about what discovery is about, keeping it so simple. And that's the power of Frankenstein in a lot of ways.
Here is the thing about Frankenstein that, again, and Perry knows me for a long time.
How the hell did we get back to Frankenstein? We are so out of order, but go ahead.
I know.
Where's Island of Lost Souls? Where's Charles Lawton?
Well,
Come
that's
on.
what we're going to do.
Wrap
32 to 1934.
Wrap up this revisit of Frankenstein, Stan, and we're going to move on.
Okay. The nominees in 1931 for Best Actor in a film, and I still say Karloff should have won, but it was a different time. Barrymore won for A Free Soul. It was Adolphe Menjou in The Front Page, a good performance. Jackie Cooper, the kid, in Skippy. Richard Dixon, Cimarron, and Frederick March in The Royal Family of Broadway. No one understood what we know today when we look back, that Karloff did something, and I love Frederick March and all of them, but his performance in Frankenstein 90 years later is probably one of the 25 greatest performances that has ever been recorded on film.
But Stan, hold on. You are idealizing the idea of the Academy Awards at that period. Much has been written that the Academy Awards at that period are far less democratic than they are today. That they were controlled by the studios, picked by the studios. Employees were told who to vote for, and so much so that there was reform in the Academy. Very little is spoken about this publicly. Only people within the industry know about this. But I would say that, I mean, how many years would you say, Stan, that the Academy Awards are pretty much a corrupt organization? I mean, in terms of the voting.
Every year.
How dare you? How dare you?
But certainly in terms of that the studio knew who the employees were voting for, and there was a contract system. So if you worked at Universal, forget what you thought, or Warner's or MGM, forget who you thought was the best. If you didn't vote for the MGM film, you were 86.
Yeah. So Steve,
there was no. I mean, of course, Karloff wasn't nominated. Universal was not the biggest. It was not the big kid on the block.
Okay, here's my idea for Billy and Steven to put something together in the future once we go through the century of horror. We judge the best picture actor and actress as we know today from way back when, and we go.
It would be like 180 degrees from what was chosen. I mean, who the hell knows what Cavalcade is anymore? It was the first Best Picture winner. No one's seen Cavalcade.
I'm a Noel Coward fan. There are moments in Cavalcade.
No, like you guys are the complete exceptions. Like
Cimarron is another story. Cimarron is another story. But
that's a special film. That's a special film.
Wait. Are you talking about the first film to win the Academy Award for Best Picture?
Wings.
It was Wings. But I gotta tell you, if modern guys saw Fay Ray in Mystery of the Wax Museum, they would say, "Oh, she's the best actress." Oh my God!
No, I would say that. Going back, I want to add one thing very quickly to what Stan was saying. I think the most telling thing about how incredible Karloff's performance is in Frankenstein is that among young people today, they can still recognize him as the Frankenstein monster. They still know who he is from that and How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And I will see, I'll pass by like a 20 or 21-year-old kid who has a Karloff Frankenstein's monster tattoo. Yeah. There's nothing comparable in 1930s cinema to that.
No,
nothing
absolutely.
In terms of continued popularity.
So we're going to move on to the final two films of this episode, which is the final two films of 1932, both in December. In December 1932, early December 1932, for some reason I don't have the exact year, I'm not sure, but it's Paramount's second foray into this genre, again adapting a literary classic. They had done Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which came out in January, and now here we are in December. Now, mind you, Paramount had done plenty other films that years, but in terms of their contributions to the horror genre, we have Island of Lost Souls, directed by Earl C. Kenton, who's a personal favorite of mine. I actually really enjoy all of his films, in particular, and the films that he would later do in the 40s. which is a film that, H.G. Wells, mind you, wrap your head around this, particularly the younger viewers here. H.G. Wells was alive when this movie came out. People
he hated it, as I recall. He really didn't like it.
He did not like the film, which I think it was a little too lurid even for his tastes. It's a brilliant film. Charles Lawton's performance is he is in another zone the whole film, but committed every step of the way. It's beautifully shot. Earl Kenton uses all of his German expressionistic talents that he brings to it. The makeups are extraordinary. Lugosi is wonderful. This is where Lugosi starts to prove his range to movie-going audiences, that he is not just the sophisticated, urbane European. He is this brute. He is this man beast, this half animal, half man, as part of the creations of the island of Dr. Moreau, which is the original title of the book. It is a film that, like Freaks, correct me if I'm wrong, Stan, on this, or Justin, that was banned in many places because
I think in the UK, yeah. It's still a nasty, scary movie. Like where they're performing performing the vivisection on the human animal. It's like, and it's screaming. It's disturbing. It is a truly disturbing film to this day.
Yeah, you could not have made the exact same film of Island of the Lost Souls. Would not have been made in 1936. They would have had to die, reel it way back in. So it is a film I highly recommend anybody to track down for a glorious performance, beautiful makeups, wonderful cinematography, a powerful story, and actually as someone of myself who's adapted H.G. Wells, a wonderful H.G. Wells adaptation. Stan, you were about to say something about the film?
Oh no, it's a wonderful picture. You have great performances. Stage actors working on a Paramount stage. It's wonderful, and the film's owned by Universal now, and you've got a Lugosi performance, which I personally think is even better than his performance as Dracula, because he gets to do a lot more than just stand in a cage.
He's got that kind of scary John Brown-like prophet intensity. And there's this great, again, like we're going back to the visual style of these things. There's that wonderful camera movement where it goes up over the pit where the animal people live. It's beautiful. And the Criterion disc, the Criterion Blu-ray of Island of Lost Souls looks just gorgeous. It's a really disturbing film. It's all the films we've talked about. I think it's probably the nastiest.
I'm sorry to keep asking you about things like makeup, but feel free to chime in on anything you'd like to talk about. Who did the makeups for Paramount then? Who was working on the Lost Souls makeups?
Well, I want to say, because it was a Westmore on Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I'm going to say it was a Westmore on this one as well. But as a sidebar, as a trivia question, if you ask somebody who directed the majority of Universal Frankenstein films, the answer would be Earl C. Kent. He directed 3 of them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
More than anybody else. So, he directed Ghost of Frankenstein, House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, which was, those are 10 or more years after this. So he established himself with this one.
The makeup department was Charles Gamora, uncredited, and Wally Westmore, uncredited. There is no makeup credit, shockingly, on this movie.
And which is astonishing because the makeup in it it's horrifying. Like that there's that sort of little pig man, and it isn't just the makeup, it's their physicality.
Yeah,
right. They don't really move like so awkwardly and strangely and grotesquely. It's like it's really disturbing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's something to be said about in a horror element in these films is the awkward, like non-human movement. And Stan, you might agree with this. It's like in Babes in Toyland in 1934, seeing that
the boogeyman,
the monkey, the boogeyman, but the monkey in the Mickey Mouse costume.
Yes.
Oddly, there's something disturbing about, like, it's almost like watching a film run backwards.
That's why that has to be a part of our next show. We have to have, March of the Wooden Soldiers / Babes in Toyland.
Yeah, that's another.
That is a horror movie. It's so funny.
Terrifying.
Yeah, it really was.
It's really
that's a whole other story, because that really was Mickey Mouse. It was designed as Mickey Mouse, and it was presented as Mickey Mouse. And Stan Laurel was friends with Walt Disney, who not only said you cannot film it in Technicolor because Disney owned the rights to Technicolor until 1935, but he said you can't use Mickey Mouse because after Hollywood Party, a feature film that they allowed Mickey Mouse to be used in, he said never again. But Stan said, we already filmed it. They said, fine, but don't call it Mickey Mouse. It was Mickey Mouse.
Wow, that's fantastic. So we're going to finish off this.
Hang on. We just have to see that.
Lota, Kathleen Burke.
Again, here is a character who. Now, mind you, I want everybody who's watching who doesn't understand this concept of pre-code to understand. Seeing a woman's décolletage, as they say, was not something that we would see again for 20 years. Low cut, no cut visions of you will see makeup and wardrobe would be right up to the collarbone from movies going forward. And you can see this truly watching, and not just the early 1930s. Look at the early 1920s. You see much more skin on the female form, and that is totally changed once 34 kicked in.
All I can say is Charles Lawton approves.
Oh yes, clearly.
Oh yeah, well, that's good God, the Tarzan movies. Those old Tarzan movies.
Let your young viewers tune in and watch Tarzan and His Mate in 1934.
Absolutely.
And they'll understand.
So we're going to finish off with one of the true.
Is that with who was that
Johnny Weissmuller,
no. Margaret Sullivan.
Oh, where's Margaret Sullivan? Okay.
O'Sullivan.
Maureen.
So we're going to finish off with a film that is a classic on multiple levels. It is The Mummy. It is directed by Karl Freund, who is the great cinematographer of so much of the early Universal titles. He does a glorious job directorially. Some people may say, Karl Freund, why do I know that name? I'm a big TV fan. Why do I know that name? It's because he directed a whole bunch of episodes of I Love Lucy, shockingly. Quite a number of episodes of I Love Lucy. His name would pop up at the beginning of I Love Lucy quite a lot 20 years later. But The Mummy has it's not only Karloff coming back 1 year later in another iconic role, but that poster we are looking at, I believe, still holds the record of all of cinema, to show you how important the films we're talking about are today. Of all of cinema, that poster holds the record at auction as the poster that fetched the highest price at auction of motion picture posters throughout cinema. Doesn't matter what genre, not Casablanca, not any other film, not a Chaplin poster. It's the poster for Karloff the Uncanny in The Mummy. And I believe it was Kurt Hammett who paid that from Metallica, who was a huge, I mean, it was a bidding war until it finally ended, because that's where auctions end. If you have two people who really want it, that's when the auction price goes high.
That's all it takes,
Well, you just wonder whatever happened to that original painting.
It's probably in a deep in a landfill somewhere. Yeah. One thing I want to say very quickly about the Mummy, this is talking about minutiae. There's a line in it that I think throws modern audiences. I went to a screening at the New Beverly once, and they were responding really favorably to it overall. But there's the part where and again, not giving anything away, Karloff as Ardath Bey is walking away, and I think David Manners touches him, and he goes, I dislike being touched, an Eastern prejudice. And the thing is that they would laugh, and they laughed, and it was like it's a glance. And the reality is, like a friend of mine that's a religious studies professor pointed out to me that it's like particularly Orthodox Muslims, if a non-Muslim touches them, they have to go through this elaborate cleansing ritual. Yes. So there's like they thought about this. Wasn't just some clever or some line that was dashed off. There's a reality to it.
Okay, Justin, I recently showed the film because every October I run like 30 Universal horror films, one every day. And I showed that to my wife. And when he said, I just like to be touched. And he said, my wife she heard I dislike to be touched. She goes, social distancing.
No. He was ahead of time. He was way ahead of his time.
Yeah.
I'm just taking a look at the writing credits on the film. Just take a look. John Balderston again. Frankenstein, Dracula, this unsung hero of so much that we take for granted. I mean, here's a man who worked on including the various mummy sequels going forward, films that we're going to talk about in later episodes: Mad Love, Mark of the Vampire, Bride of Frankenstein. Well, Bride of Frankenstein is as an adaptation, but The Mummy as a screenplay, Frankenstein based on his play, and then finally they brought him in to work as a screenwriter on The Mummy, having worked on the stage plays of Dracula earlier. So we talk about film very much from a director's point of view, and as a screenwriter, I like to take a moment to talk about the screenwriters, particularly when we get to the 1940s and films like the Val Lewton films we'll be talking about, and so many of the films that have such glorious screenplays. But these are not these as well. The Mummy is an extraordinary film. The Mummy, the bandaged mummy, is someone who only exists in the first act. After that, he's Imhotep, which again is quite a daring makeup for Universal horror film. They had not realized, do people want to see a mummy walking around dramatically that's rather, and no pun intended, inert? And they were kind of right. We need an actual character who can speak, and that's where Karloff's glorious makeup once again Jack Pierce, recognizing the human face. I mean, Perry, you've played Jack Pierce, so it's extraordinary what Jack Pierce really didn't try to impose a makeup on the face. He truly looked at the face and decided. I mean, there's some serendipity between the casting and what he was going to do. Would you agree?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, not only that, but they obviously weren't giving makeup Oscars in 1932. They didn't do that until 82. But Jack Pierce received an award. It was a Hollywood Filmograph Award in 1932 for his makeup on Karloff and the Mummy.
I had no idea. Wow.
Yes, the legend is that when Universal Studios was tearing down the makeup bungalow to install the Jurassic Park ride, they were going through the makeup studio, and underneath a sink was this award that had been sitting there all those years. And I believe Rick Baker has it today, but I think Rick Baker has that Hollywood Filmograph Award. But yeah, I mean, again, that's a whole other discussion about, the dismissive nature of studios to their history. But Pierce reused.
Look how glorious that makeup is, how simple it is, and yet how distinctive it is from anything else. That is an icon. Every makeup, Jack Pierce, this man who shares a Greek heritage with me, who shares a birthday with me, who is everything. It was so distinctive. It was so one of a kind. It was that this man died. Fortunately, now he is appreciated, but died unappreciated. Died dismissed by the studio that he had built by these iconic makeups.
Yeah.
It's just, and we're tracking it now, and I want to take that moment, and I'm happy that we're taking it towards the very end of the episode today to really pay tribute to this man. I mean, he is no small part, and in fact, he is one freaking huge part of the legacy of Universal horror, and therefore horror in general, because he gave that power to it. He gave audiences something to latch onto that then spawned decades and decades all the way up to today of the monsters that we all go to, that we enjoy, and that we celebrate.
Well, and generations and generations and generations of kids recognize these monsters, and it's really extraordinary. And back to what Perry was saying very briefly, one thing I found really, really shocking as I went looking for props and things and costumes from the classic Universal monster movies, almost nothing exists. Almost nothing.
Oh no,
I mean,
nothing.
It's just unreal how little exists. Especially from the early ones that we're talking about.
What about this? What's on display in Los Angeles at the Science Museum that I didn't get to go to?
That's about it. They made a big. There was. It was really interesting. The Natural History Museum, the Los Angeles Natural History Museum, was very, very sharp. When nobody was thinking about saving this stuff, they asked Universal, "Hey, can we have a bunch of this stuff?" And they got some fantastic stuff. They have Lon Chaney's apparatus from The Penalty. And I think the costume that goes with it. They have a bunch of just odds and ends from the Universal monster movies, bits and pieces from The Mummy and stuff like that. Nothing really, really super extraordinary. But I mean, outside of say like the stuff, the Lon Chaney stuff. But they did at one point apparently have an original Bride of Frankenstein, this Karloff dummy and costume that are now at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And that's a long, long, complicated story. I followed that one for a long time. But it's just about it. I mean, there's almost, you would think, as continually popular and continually important as these films are, and I think this goes back to what Stan was saying. It's like you think it's, hindsight's 2020, and I don't think people catch on to what's going to be important at the time by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, because they thought film was disposable at that time. They didn't they didn't understand the idea of it actually living on, and they thought the film happens and it's gone.
I had mentioned earlier on in the last episode when I was briefly on that
was that you, Stan? I didn't.
That was me. Universal systematically in 1948, because they did not want to pay for the storage, destroyed all but 18 of their silent films because they didn't want to pay for the storage. So we lost a lot of history. But Carl Laemmle, God bless him, allowed people to buy 16mm prints of the films. And now Universal is repatriating many of those films. So we are able to see some of the stuff that we thought was lost. Yeah. But when we go back to the horror films, thank goodness they've saved most of the original material. So not only do we owe a debt to Carl Laemmle Jr., but if it wasn't for Jack Pierce, most of these characters we would not revere today.
Right. Now, if I may, salute.
Yes, salute.
Stan, if you may, I have...
hold on, Billy. A toast to Jack Pierce.
Jack Pierce, who was he was the Charlie Chaplin of Universal makeup.
Absolutely.
Monster Maker's Monster Maker.
Absolutely. And we will get some of his major ones when we do our 1940s episode. Yeah. Certainly in the latter part of the 30s, you did some more. But Billy, go ahead. I'm sorry.
If I may, Stan, in honor of Jack Pierce and Karloff, and just that we have and 16mm print surviving from those original 35.
Yeah,
we have a delight for our audience here. It's very brief. It's the Frankenstein original trailer for the film Frankenstein.
Okay, let me explain what we're going to
do that, because I don't want to lose that on this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And you have the other thing that you might end with, but
yes, we will
explain what you're going to see right now. This is technically the first re-release of the Frankenstein trailer, but it's the original Frankenstein trailer with a quick opening.
So the trailer is not from 1930 or 31, but it is a reprint of the same trailer they used with one little exception. Okay.
Yes. In the opening, you'll see it says "coming again" or whatever it is. But every scene you see in this trailer was not in the film, including there's one quick scene after the monster kills Dr. Frankenstein's, mentor. His teacher, and you'll see the monster leaving the lab. But
Dr.
every shot,
okay, let's take a look. Let us take a look, Billy.
All right.
Roll.
It's alive. It's alive.
Something is going to happen. I feel it. I can't get it out of my mind.
You're just nervous.
single shot you just saw is not in the original Frankenstein film.
But I didn't. Did I
That's
miss?
great
Did I miss
stuff.
the Dr. Waldman shot? I missed the Dr. Waldman shot.
He's already dead. The monster left. He had already gotten off the table and he was leaving.
Oh, is that overhead shot? I'd never seen that before in my life.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was like I'd never seen that shot before of Frankenstein in my life.
Okay.
Wow.
Because every shot in that and in every trailer up until 78 comes from alternate takes. But in that shot, they used footage. They didn't care. Did you hear Mae Clark scream? It was wrong. It was recorded wrong. It was wrong. But that every shot is not in the film.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even the sounds like live stage sound.
Yep. No, thank you, Stan, because these have not been put on any of the Blu-rays or DVDs.
No, they have not.
So everybody,
they're right there.
Ladies and gentlemen who are watching this, just so you know, we actually have provided rarities, and thank you, Stan, who took the films that he has, he put them onto a digital format. He didn't WeTransfer them. He put them on a disc and he mailed them across this country of ours by USPS. Sent them to Billy Tucci and Niall Scala, our man behind this, the man behind the curtain, as they say, of this show, and Niall provided it and served it all up for us so that we can have it tonight. So thank you, Stan, for these clips.
And I sent him one more.
Yes, which we'll close with. And Billy will hold off on the other pre-code montage for our second episode on 3334. We'll hold off on that.
I think we should. I think that
I know Billy will want to bid his farewells, but I want to say thank you to this panel. I want to thank you to all of you who are watching. I think this is one for the time capsule. I think anybody who would like to actually study the short year that was 1931, but the major year that was 1932, we'll have a lot of fun with this. Please tune in the next time we do this, which will be 1933 and 34, which is no shabby list, including The Invisible Man, Mystery of the Wax Museum, and a little picture called King Kong,
October 30th,
and The Black Cat, which we'll be doing on Halloween's Eve's Eve, which is October 30th, Friday, October 30th. So we would like to close, and Billy, please say any words you'd like before we move on.
I just want to say we've got, and we've gone over 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
We've got an amazing amount of questions and comments.
Mm-hmm.
We promised that we didn't know you guys were going to come back this quickly with so many amazing comments, facts, research people are doing, and we promised we'll get to them next time.
Yes, for sure.
You guys will join us on the 30th, and we'll make sure that if it's okay, since we'll cut it just to 2 incredible years, 2 wonderful years, that we will get to them and we'll ask our panel, or our panel can comment on them, because we have an amazingly knowledgeable audience and very engaging, and it's a lot of fun. But again, as I said, we're over 2 hours on this. We want to keep this an hour and a half because we want to keep our shows condensed when people watch it afterwards. But we're going to come back. 1933 to 34 is going to be a hoot.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to close.
We
want to close with at the end of Dracula, and as at the end of our show, there shall and there will be a curtain speech. And there was supposed to be one at the end of Dracula, which did not actually surface into the theatrical release, and certainly the release that lives on Blu-ray and DVD. Right. Stan, do you want to cue us up before we send out the audience with this?
Absolutely. In 1931, when David Manners, the brilliant Laurence Olivier-esque actor, is walking up the stairs, the film fades out and it fades in. And all of you who are watching, when it says the end, if you look at the globe on the bottom right-hand corner, all of a sudden, the words, "It's a Universal picture," pop up. But all of the early Universal pictures, it slowly fades in to those words. But in this Dracula, it pops up. The reason why was there was a curtain speech that Edward Van Sloan gave.
He played Dr. Van Helsing, the famous vampire hunter.
He played Van Helsing. And what he said was he was stopping the audience for a moment before they leave the theater, and he was standing literally at the foot of the movie theater screen, and he gave a speech. Well, the speech was in the film in 1931, but 5 years later, in 36, when the film was re-released, the production code, which had already taken over by 34, said, you can't put that in. Universal cut it out. Now, I want to stress, Carl Laemmle at that point did not own the studio anymore, and the new Universal people cut it out. Ever since then, the film is run and you never see this curtain speech. And the curtain speech was lost. The negative was destroyed. All prints were destroyed. But somewhere in Europe, there was a 1931 release print of Dracula that had a very badly spliced print that had part of the curtain speech. What happens is David Manners and Helen Chandler walk up the steps, the film fades out, and it opens up with the end title. And before it says it's a Universal picture, Edward Van Sloan comes out and you hear his voice and he says this, just a moment, ladies and gentlemen. A word before you go. We hope the memories of Dracula and Renfield won't give you bad dreams. So just a word of reassurance. When you get home tonight and the lights have been turned out, you are afraid to look behind the curtains and you dread to see a face appear at the window, why, just pull yourself together and remember that after all, there are such things as vampires. Then the film dissolved, and then you saw the Universal end title pop up, and it dissolved into It's a Universal Picture. Now, when you see the film today, there is a negative cut where you see the end title, and it pops up with It's a Universal Picture. What you're going to see now is the only surviving footage from one European print that survived that I was able to borrow. And this is the first time that I know it has largely been seen, badly spliced, but this is how Dracula ended in 1931.
Which is why Stan read it to us, because he wanted to make sure we understood the context, because it's very splicey. But this is all that exists, folks, and you're seeing it here. Not on any other show, not on PBS, not on Turner Classic Movies. Here, folks. And Billy, take it away, sir.
The YouTube premiere of the Dracula curtain speech from 1931.
Memories of Dracula will view badly. And soon you get home tonight and the lights are turned out and you're afraid to look behind the curtains, or you dread to see a face, so why just pull yourself at after all. There are such things.
I'm glad that there are such things is totally uninterrupted. I love it. And that's it. And folks, I just want you to know there are such things, and we will continue with such things. We've had 2 episodes of such things, and we will have another episode on October 30th, Friday, October 30th, a true Halloween show. And Stan promises to dress up as the Bride of Frankenstein. On that show. Oh, no, not yet. That's 33, 34. He can't be the Bride of Frankenstein. Too soon.
Yes, too soon.
So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to these glorious panelists and your minds and your life experiences that you have brought here tonight for Billy and I and our audiences. We will be back on October 30th. This has been A Century of Horror Pre-Code Part 1, Episode 2 of our show. 90, 30, 31, 32. We will be back on October 30th with 33 and 34 and a whole lot of new stuff to show you all. Thank you all. Have a great night, and thank you all for being here.
Yes.
Thank you,
gentlemen,
Steve.
this truly was a privilege. I want to let you know that we are now 5 backers away, 5 subs away from 2,700 subscribers. So if you guys are out there watching, our friends are watching, please share it. We've got an incredible panel here. So much knowledge. I pretty much did this all for me because I just want to talk about things like this. It reminds me when Steve and I were 12 years old, talking, just going through the whatever books or magazines or famous monsters, and it just what a wealth of information. I feel truly privileged to be here with you guys, and I learned so much. I mean, look at this comic book Bob here right here. Please tell me you guys are going to do these shows for the Hammer year, Stephen.
We will. There it is, right up
behind Steve right there.
Behind me there. We are going to be doing a Hammer show. Absolutely. We won't be so slavish to years and decades, because once we get into things like Roger Corman and drive-in cinema and all sorts of stuff, we're going to be compartmentalizing. Billy and I are working that all out as we go forward. So yes, absolutely. This show will continue to live and continue to breathe, and we'll have wonderful panelists all throughout the show.
Such a wealth of information, Stephen. I think we might have to, like I said, we're condensing years.
Mm-hmm.
We might have to do a show on a film, on a particular film.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, do you have those photos I sent you of what the Universal stage looks like now?
Well, let's use it next week, only because I will sign off. We'll pop that on next week. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
And for everyone out there, one more shot, Fay Ray.
Yes.
Oh. You're Aloy.
Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I love it.
You gotta love it.
All righty.
Anyway, guys,
thanks, everybody.
please join us once again. Here's another one. Yes.
Ah.
And again, of course,
Yay.
approves.
Don't be a naughty Lawton.
There was a great. I will say very quickly about Charles Lawton. When they did Barrett's of Wimpole Street, they censored the hell out of all these implications of incest in it, and they asked Lawton what he thought about it, and he goes, "They can't censor the gleam in my eye."
Well, let me tell you, Island of Lost Souls is filled with sadistic gleam all throughout.
On behalf of my co-host Stephen Perros, Stan, Perry, Justin, wonderful panel. So looking forward to the 30th, and I'm going to take us out, and we'll go forward onto the next show. So I want to thank you all, everyone out there. Thank you for watching. Thank you for the likes. Thank you for the shares. Thank you for the amazing comments. More so than questions, just a very knowledgeable people in the comments in the chats. So I want to thank you all. Thank you. Good night. Happy Friday, and we'll see you guys next week on the POPXP. Thank you. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us on POPXP. If you haven't already, make sure to click that subscribe button and also click the bell for notifications when we go live and we upload some awesome new content. Also, don't forget to head on over to Twitter and follow us at the POPXP and over on Instagram at the POPXP. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you soon.